Hello and welcome to Research Analysis. If you're looking for tips on how to execute research, that is research execution. This video assumes that you already have all your data collected, so go there if you don't already. Alright, in this video we're going to be talking about how to convert data collected into meaningful findings. Many students haven't been taught how to deeply analyze data before, so hopefully this video can get you started. Keep in mind as you watch that the conclusions and insights you draw from your collected data will be very niche and focused for your project. As a result, it is difficult for us to teach you specifically what to analyze, so we're tending to stick to solid frameworks instead. To start, we have 4 main segments to this video. How to organize data, that'll be super fast, how to find patterns, how to build insights, and finally, how to create actions based on these. In that first step, we're going to be talking about organizing your data. The key objective of this is to make the collected data digestible before you're drawing conclusions. Otherwise, your brain is going to skip ahead and you're going to start labeling things based on bias. While data organization will vary based on your collection methods, there's a basic checklist of things to run through. The idea here is we're wanting the organized data to be based on signals. Basically, it's like the preliminary start for patterns and not letting our bias get in the way. Additionally, just because you think something that would be, for example, secondary research, an article on student ADHD would fall under background context, maybe you end up using it for stats later, so it might be better to organize it into stats-based research. The first step generally when we're organizing is to create a naming system. If you've ever tried uploading homework for school on an online platform and realized, oh no, I used the default system name, now I can't find it, you probably understand it's incredibly easy to lose things digitally. I know I have at least 20 documents on my Mac right this moment that are labeled document 1 because I didn't bother to save them right. Don't be like me, be better. Generally, there are 2 main formats that you can use for formulaically developing a naming system. The first is the one given here. Date, the name of the person involved, and a short descriptor. Or you can do topic descriptor rubric section when you're more specifically targeting it towards data. For example, I could say primary research, interview roster, research analysis. Topic descriptor rubric section. While it's not the prettiest file name, it makes it really easy to search up and is descriptive at a glance. When I say easy to search up, I know for me when I was developing my project, I did everything by rubric section, so when I had to grab things that were relevant to my target market, it was just as simple as looking up target market and everything related to it would show up. Additionally, when you are saving files, you're going to want to make sure to separate them by source type. Interviews, surveys, notes, all that good stuff. It's going to make it much easier later on, especially if you're running multiple different types of data collection. Additionally, interviews and observational notes, as well as any corresponding results, should always get their own tabs or folders within your system. If you're downloading articles or textbooks to study from, I highly recommend you not only save all of them to the same folder, but also save your corresponding notes to the same folder that the corresponding piece of research is in. When you have interviews that you have to transcript, or if you're watching a video or anything like that, where you're going to be taking observations not on just the information, but also the behavior, consider breaking up transcripts or videos into small blocks by topic that makes it easier later to analyze. If there's a pause in the conversation, or if you ask a question, it's a great place to use as a natural divider when you're blocking these up. As you're going through and reorganizing your notes, this ends up being a strong way to flag your attention during rereads. I recommend leaving comments, or in videos, sometimes you can create flags with in-system editing. I know Mac has that option. And these will allow you to easily jump to important pieces and parts, especially if you have, for example, an hour-long interview or a 2-hour-long documentary you're watching. As you're going through, if you don't have, for example, a pause in the conversation or a question that you ask, another good place to add bookmarks is emotional or unexpected parts. You can use this in anything, not just interviews and video formats. I use it when I'm reading articles, when I'm reading stories, when I'm reading basically anything for research. The reason why we're focusing on emotion or unexpected is these help with the persuasive argument standpoint. As we already know, a decapaper is just that. It's just a fancy argument. I think I've used this description like 3 times now in videos. But specifically talking about emotion or unexpected pieces, these might be, for emotion, incredibly beneficial to your argument. And for unexpected, they might be something that could be a shock and awe factor, or could spur on, or could encourage later research into that. Additionally, if you are using anything like everything's just in one Google Doc, make sure to use your headers. This seems really simple, but things like Word or Docs or Google will all have integrated table of contents that use headers, so that way you can just go through, have that table of contents set to auto sync, and it'll just keep adding on, making it easier to rapidly read through. Additionally, if you don't feel like using that, I recommend leaving comments, especially if you're in a group. They'll act as natural bookmarks, so you can go back searching through all your comments, easily find things, and it'll also help your group members understand what you're thinking. For websites, if you are comfortable downloading extensions, there are some fantastic web annotation tools out there that will let you highlight, add notes, and save snippets directly from web pages. Some tools even have an auto-cite feature that allows you to create a permalink, which makes it easier to look back. Speaking as a double major college student who reads a lot for her classes and for Go for Glass research, I personally like Hypothesis. That's not an ad, just a personal opinion. And additionally, since I am on the topic of tools and extensions that are incredibly useful, I'd like to point out 2 other platforms, Notion and Obsidian. These are great for fast tagging and sorting. I use the free versions for both of these. Notion is great because you can collaboratively build what is basically a website and you can publish it for free. It's where the current Go for Glass resource site is hosted. If you're working on a project where you potentially want to build a website as a prop but don't have the skill to do so, or maybe even just the time, I highly recommend looking into Notion as well for that. From an organizational standpoint, Notion is incredibly powerful, especially since you can directly embed videos, files, things like that. I haven't seen any students do this yet, but I personally think that creating a resource analysis portfolio would be powerful, especially if that's something you add to your LinkedIn. I know when I was a student just starting out with not much else on my resume section, I had a lot of personal projects I was putting on as sort of a way to fill that out and showcase my skills even if I didn't have work experience. As for Obsidian, I think that has about 2 to 4 gigabytes of vault data, and it offloads it from the Mac or your computer. I'm not sure how it works. I'm not a tech person, but Obsidian is great. Only downside to it is there's a slight learning curve, and you can't publish it publicly, so you can't collaborate. But Obsidian is more powerful than Notion when it comes to organizing. There's a lot of really cool embeds and things you can do with Obsidian. I personally have my life tracker and everything like tasks, schedules on Obsidian. Anyway, once you have organized your data, we move on to step 2, which is looking for repetition and redundancy. The purpose of this step is to find out what most people felt, said, or did, because repetition means there's probably an emerging pattern or trend of marketplace friction. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to read all of our data twice. On the first pass, we're going to be doing a redundancy sweep. As you were collecting data, you might have been taking little notes or making little conclusions, and that's great. I highly encourage you to do that. You still have to do the redundancy sweep. You're going to be looking for 3 main things in your first pass: repetition, emotion, and surprises. While I've already gone over why repetition is important, let's really quickly tackle emotion and surprises. At the end of the day, humans are largely driven by emotion. Even the most logical of us can be swayed by gut instincts or reactions to something we've read or consumed. When we see emotional responses in data, we can generally use that to identify a core underlying need or desire. As for surprises, not everybody knows everything. There's a reason why marketing consulting groups pay so much money every single year for data insights into their consumers, even if it's just data that says, yeah, we affirm that nothing really has changed in the last year. When we start with analysis, we should go in expecting to find hints that there are external issues that we didn't consider. That's where that surprise moment comes up. If any data feels weird or you're unsure what it means, look into it. You see a repetition of jargon, look into it. If you see people bringing up a topic you've never heard before, look into it. For your second pass, you'll be building on pass 1, and you're tallying up the repeated concepts you see, even if they're worded a little differently. For example, if we ask a bunch of students why they don't like studying, we might hear, "It's hard to stay focused. I keep getting distracted. I lose track of things I have to do." Even if these are all worded differently, they all point to the same core pattern of a concentration issue. So we can take that and we can learn, and we can say, our students don't like studying because they struggle to concentrate. How can we build off of that? How can we help solve that? So at this point, you've identified patterns, you haven't really started making analysis, but just at least organized. So now we start breaking down the data. You can think of this as the pre-insights deep analysis stage. It's not really useful as it is currently, so we start with this preliminary factoids. You're going to take those patterns, or you're going to take all of the data you collected, and you're going to go through and you're going to ask yourself 3 questions. What are the facts? What are the feelings? And what are the frictions? Let's say we have that survey where we asked students why they don't like studying. The facts, that would be the number of people who responded. That would be any things like data collected about the average leave time, how much they spent on apps in total. Maybe they have tried a bunch of different apps. Maybe they've paid for premium apps. Maybe they've only tried free apps. Maybe they've never tried another app before. Giving as much qualitative data is useful in other factoids, but sometimes we need to start with the quantitative. Then feelings. This is that primary research, the stuff you've collected. This is surveys, this is interviews, this is focus groups, this is pilot groups, anything like that. And then frictions. Frictions is just what is causing failure or struggle. This is generally going to be self-professed. It's not easy to quantitatively say why there is failure or struggle because that derives from a human reaction. So at this point, each piece of data will get 3 pieces associated with it. And we're going to ask ourselves a question for each of these. What happened? What was expressed? And what caused struggle or failure? You can build off of this, but as long as you have at least one sentence to start, it'll make the next step easier, which is how we create insights. So insights are short, meaningful statements that synthesize many points into something usable. And we have here a really basic formula. Users have an emotion or belief because of an underlying cause, which leads to observable outcomes or behaviors. For example, let's say we take the data point from before, where we asked students how they felt about studying. And plugging it directly into this formula, we could say something like, students feel guilty about taking breaks because they believe productivity must be constant in order to be valid, which leads them to ask for rigid study tools when what they actually need is emotional permission to rest. If we reword it just a little bit, we could say, users feeling overwhelmed when logging in because of many choices leading to high abandonment. Or we could say, students say they want study tools that help them stay on task or on schedule, but they really need emotional permission to take breaks, as they mask as poor planning. This ends up being a really super easy formula to follow, and it contributes to high quality insights, even on your first sweep through. The only downside is it sounds really robotic, which is why we're going to have to do the following. We are going to have to reflect on these insights. And there's a couple ways to do this, and we're going to go through each of these. But the main point of the reflection and the strategies that we go over is to add depth and is to humanize them. Nobody wants to have their paper be formulaic and sound incredibly boring. With the 3 question format, we're approaching each question with, you get it, you guessed it, 3 questions. So what's needed, and what's at stake? So let's take that example of the users forget to return to our study app. Our original insight might be the users are forgetting to return to the app. Our so what is really basic. We're looking at the outcome. What directly happens because they're forgetting to return to the app? Here, the outcome is that they're going to lose momentum and will never build the habit that helps them stay focused while studying. What's needed is pretty simple. What change or feature could be implemented to overcome the barrier? Here we might say a reminder system where it sends notifications, or maybe an automatic continuity feature so that they can resume where they left off, maybe with a little refresher. Here's what's happened, here's what you were studying last time, here's how you can get back into it. And then finally, the what's at stake. If we never overcame or addressed this issue, what would happen? Generally, we're going to point this from the perspective of the business, not the consumer. For example, we could say that low retention leads to a lower lifetime value, which in turn is going to lead to wasted acquisition spending. The 3 format questions are by far the easiest to get into. The only downside is it plays into bias. If you're already under the assumption that you know everything about a topic, or you're not seeing or you're not making the connection for something really important underneath the surface, this format can lead your notes to being an echo chamber. So it's a great start, but you're going to want to continue to expand off of it. And as such, we move into big picture, small picture. We start by zooming out to the big picture. The benefit of the big picture is that it's evaluating what your data reveals about the broader context. This could be things like industry trends, emerging behaviors, cultural shifts, or anything else that impacts people en masse. The benefit to be found here is because we're connecting these small observations to macro level changes, we're going to get a deeper understanding of not just the why people are doing things, but what they're doing. But how do we do that? The simplest answer is it's a lot of research. However, there are some guiding questions that can make that research more effective. For example, we could ask, how do these insights reflect larger trends in the industry? How are these behaviors or needs unique to our audience? Or is it part of a growing pattern across society? Could these findings signal future opportunities or threats for others or ourselves in the market? What assumptions are being challenged here? How is our data going against the grain of the status quo? Now, this is all kind of a word salad, so let's kind of contextualize it a bit. Let's say we see a pattern emerging in our data where there's a real desire for flexible learning. That might shift a larger part of the educational system towards asynchronous student-centered designs, or the need for customization of curriculum because student neurodivergency is on the rise. Or if many of our students are saying that they're fatigued with endless choices from too much personalization online, we could say that that links to overall decision fatigue in digital spaces. We look at the big picture to predict where our market or category is heading. If we can get ahead of the curve, we position ourselves as the strongest choice by aligning our product to that problem, that insight, that big picture movement before anyone else moves. And the power of first mover advantage, it really cannot be overstated. However, there's a cautionary note here. There's a mistake that a lot of students will do with big picture analysis, and that's overgeneralization. And in fact, I just made that mistake a moment ago. Did you catch it? If many of our student responders are saying that they're fatigued with endless choices from too much personalization online, we can't actually say that there's an overall decision fatigue in digital spaces, because we have to look closer at the context of our data. We were looking at educational spaces. We could make the argument that there's decision fatigue in digital learning spaces because that fits the context of our argument and the research we conducted, but we simply lack the data to say there's an overall decision fatigue of personalization in digital spaces. Because once again, that's not what we were asking. That's not what we were looking at. We cannot apply that argument elsewhere. And that's when we zoom into the small picture. The big picture is awesome when we want to discover problems, but how do we find solutions? Discovering that there are decision fatigues in learning spaces that are digital because there's too much personalization, and there's also a need for curriculum that's asynchronous and student-centered, doesn't magically mean our insights are exceeding expectations yet. In order to really hit the full points for research analysis, we have to pair our zoomed out analysis with what I like to call the personal picture analysis. It's technically a small picture, but I figured alliteration would help you better retain the idea. Personal picture is zooming in and considering what those insights mean on a more personal and human level. We never want to overlook the more niche and specific experiences that might be powerful in small numbers. Because take into consideration, any of your primary research, it's always going to have, to some degree, a selection bias. It can be self-selection bias, where the only people responding are the people who feel super strongly on the topic. It could be a location bias, where you did not account for things outside of your general vicinity. It could be a platform bias, in that your collection method was limiting. There's always going to be something that changes the context and credibility. So, just like the big picture, we can guide our analysis with some questions. Who is most impacted by this issue? Even if they weren't the most frequent people who were speaking or responding to our research. How does this insight affect the emotional or day-to-day reality of a specific user segment? Generally, you want to start with your target market, but then as you zoom in, you might find, hey, there's another market, or there's another specific type of consumer who is actually impacted by this that I didn't think about. Can this be a pain point for a silent majority who maybe didn't speak up? Sort of building off of that last question. And finally, does this insight represent an underserved or overlooked niche? A fun side effect of tailoring your project to be more accessible overall is that it'll generally boost the usability or attractiveness for the entire customer market. Onesies are iconic for so many reasons, and it's not just because they're fluffy, but they were originally intended to be used by customers who lack the motor function to use buttons easily. They were meant to be comfortable and aid the people who cared for motor impaired people. They ended up being picked up by the masses who loved the comfy the comfy blanket-esque romper, and the rest is history. For example, contextualizing it, even if an insight applies to only non-native speakers, or they say it's hard to understand your messaging, the adaptations of this can lead to language accessibility that means everyone can more effectively connect with your message. Additionally, if we saw that only 2 of our students responded in a survey saying that they feel shame when they have to ask for help, that might still justify including a low-friction support option, like anonymous Q&A or passive guidance. All of these together, these 4 main questions, answering them can help you make sure that you're not overlooking anything. And it also prevents you from overgeneralizing because you're having to zoom in so deeply. So let's talk about the insight sorting matrix. And before I talk about this, I want to talk about when insights are valuable. Insights become valuable, but only when you're tying them to a specific action type. For each cluster insight, we want to brainstorm a few things. We want to brainstorm like a feature, a messaging change, some sort of support feature, all of that good stuff. The purpose of the insight sorting matrix is it's a great tool that allows you to place each complaint based on its frequency and impact in order to identify the highest priority fixes. This is where that tallying, the second read-through comes through. This matrix is best used when we're trying to prioritize what to act on, and is especially important when you're trying to improve your internal team decision-making. And the way it works is super simple. You're going to plot each insight on a 2x2 grid, like this, where we have 4 boxes. The category to prioritize will be the issues with high frequency and high impact, over here, as they are going to impact the most users drastically, followed by high impact, low frequency, and then low impact but high frequency, and finally low impact, low frequency. This matrix is going to allow you to focus on the most repeated issues that the users care deeply about. For example, if you see that the sign-up form was too long, came up 7 times, and that caused a drop-off in your survey, but fonts are ugly only came up once, then we are probably going to put those in different spaces. And using this matrix, you'd be able to realize that the sign-up form being too long the complaint is both higher impact and higher frequency, which allows you to focus your attention on resolving this issue. And once again, here, that focus needs to be the biggest pain point that affects the most people. But the reason why we looked at that personal matrix is so that we can delineate between impact being high impact, low frequency, and low impact, low frequency. So while this matrix on its surface does look like that it implies we should be only going by the masses, you do want to make sure that you're looking at the smaller, less frequently encountered issues as well. There are some basic formulas that I'll be posting along with this video if you're looking at high quality analysis. But for the most part, as long as you have for each problem, each thing that you're studying, 2 big picture, 2 small picture analyses, that's generally enough because that'll be multiplied by 3 or 4 depending on how many problems you're encountering, and that'll be very holistically strong for your paper. As always, thank you for supporting Go for Class, and we'll see you next time.